Okay, this is time 3 that I'm trying to record this particular piece. Zoom is not cooperating with me today. I'm talking about some research and ideas that we know about memory. So I'm going to jump straight into flashbulb memories. And I don't know why that's not moving. Okay, flashbulb memories are strong memories that have an emotional content. They're not traumatic, but they have a strong emotional content. Basically, when we live through something that has emotional power to us, our amygdala will release neurotransmitters to make those memories more locked in, and we release hormones too that help do that. So if you remember where you were when you were told of the loss of a loved one or a family member, that's probably a flashbulb memory. Maybe your high school graduation is a flashbulb memory. A collective one that most people in the U.S. share if you're older is when the jets crashed into the Twin Towers on 9/11. That is a collective or group flashbulb memory. Traumatic memories are also strong memories. And I know we've talked a fair amount about PTSD. When a child lives through traumatic events, often, not always, but often, they will repress. That is basically not willingly, but unconsciously shove that material into their unconscious where it cannot be easily activated or recalled or retrieved. But for adults, when they live through traumatic events like a car accident, basically sometimes those memories are stored as like little pieces or images or flashes, and a person will relive those things. And that's not necessarily good, because when a person relives those things, basically the sympathetic nervous system kicks in, and with those release of hormones, just basically makes those memories dig in deeper. There are some drugs that can help interfere with that. Beta blockers are a class of drugs that depress the sympathetic nervous system so that those memories can't be repeatedly ground in, but they have to be taken pretty closely after the event that happens. Also, one of the things we know from therapy is that if a person can learn how to get themselves into a calm state and then tell the story, and it's got to be a flowing story with a beginning, middle, and end of the things that happen while they stay in a calm state, that type of exposure therapy can really help to reduce the symptoms of PTSD. So it's a trauma reaction having to do with memories, and being able to make those memories cohesive as a story appears to decrease the interference of PTSD symptoms. Some of the problems that we have with memory. I'd like you to watch this experiment. The very top one, the video on memory experiment, is basically a brain games of a famous study that was done by Elizabeth Loftus on memory. This study that she did involved having a huge group of people watch a film of a car accident, and then she divided that huge group of people into small groups, and then she went to them separately and said, okay, I want you to answer some questions about that video that you saw. And she asked one group, how fast were those cars going when they contacted one another? She asked another group, how fast were those cars going when they hit each other? She'd ask another group, how fast were those cars going when they smashed into each other? And you can guess, when she said smashed into each other, people said they were going faster. So this is a problem with the reconstruction of memory. Actually, we don't store memories perfectly. We will store memories, again, using our hippocampus, especially for the events we live through. But then when we go to retrieve those that have been stored, when we pull it back out, it's kind of like pulling up a Word document, but there'll be little gaps and little holes in it. Now, we're not trying to lie to ourselves or to other people, but we don't like to have gaps and holes in our memory. So our brain starts to fill those in with things that make sense with the rest of the story. It may be inaccurate, and that happens to a lot of memories. People will say, oh, I know that, but it's like, we're actually twisting it a little bit, not on purpose, but because we want a coherent story in our head. This can be a problem, especially in court cases, because you can imagine investigators of crimes and lawyers and attorneys, when they have a witness up on the witness stand for a trial, will want to win their case, especially the lawyers. And so they will ask leading questions, which will lead to memory reconstruction for the witnesses. This is especially problematic in cases of where a person's been accused of a crime, and the person who witnesses the crime, the person who committed the crime, are of different races. We have something that's known as the own race bias, and that is the idea that we are better at recognizing faces from our own race than from different races. This is way less true if a person has a lot of contact cross-racially. So students, faculty, and staff at Lincoln have a lot of cross-racial contact, probably not as much a problem than with the rest of the population. But if a person is isolated within their own racial group, and they're actually part of a trial where they're asked to identify someone from a different race, that eyewitness testimony is often inaccurate and has led to many people being wrongly convicted. There is a not-for-profit group called the Innocence Project, which is, because of their efforts, there have been over 390 exonerations. That means people who have been convicted of crimes released because DNA evidence showed they were innocent and was contrasting with what the eyewitness testimony said. Another thing in terms of misinformation lawsuits, I mean, again, you can think about all the bias that can creep into questions that lawyers ask and investigators can ask. All right, I'm going to switch gears to other problems that we have with memory. One of the big things is that we forget a lot, obviously, and we forget a lot quickly. There is research on what's called the forgetting curve, where you map out how quickly a person forgets things. One famous researcher in psychology, for some reason, came up with a whole list of like nonsense syllables, memorized all of them, put them in a drawer, and then tested himself after a couple minutes, after 20 minutes, after an hour, after 2 hours, 8 hours, the next day, the next day, the next day. And what he mapped out is what's called the forgetting curve. And that is that most of those things he forgot right away, and then he held on to a significant amount as time went on. So you're probably familiar with this. I think I mentioned this the other day, in that if you're trying to learn Spanish, what this graph here shows that if you take a Spanish class, after the first year, you're going to forget over half of it. But you hang on to about 40%. So we forget most of the stuff right away and hang on to a significant chunk. What this graph does not show is that we can relearn that information faster. It's in there. We just need the right retrieval cues. So if you're exposed to this vocabulary again, you'll pick them up a lot more quickly the second time. Also, there's interference that can get in the way of memory, good memory. So that's the idea that new information or old information can get in the way of trying to remember what you're trying to recall. Sometimes students will have my class in psychology and a sociology class at the same time. Those two disciplines sometimes use the same terms in slightly different ways. If they have a test on the same day in both classes, you can have a lot of interference there. The best thing a person can do if they're studying for a test is immediately afterwards, just sleep. Don't watch TV, don't get on social media, don't do anything else. That way those memories can be consolidated and you'll minimize interference of other information. The last set of ideas I want to talk about are retrieval cues. And we have 3 different types of those. We have place retrieval cues, mood retrieval cues, and bodily state. So a place memory cue is like, basically, the example I think of is I had a really good friend of mine that I went to graduate school with, and then she moved away. I walk around downtown Columbia a lot, and I see the places where we hung out, where we like saw a band, where we had went to a restaurant, and I'll see those, and I'll ask her on the phone. I'll say, "Hey, do you remember when we did that?" She goes, "How do you remember all this?" And I'm having these place retrieval cues because I'm seeing these places. As I see these places, it activates those memories for me. So those are some retrieval cues related to a place a person is in. There are also mood retrieval cues. Mood retrieval cues have to do with if a person is in a depressed mood, the types of memories that are most accessible to them, they can recall, are typically depressed memories. The good news is when a person's happy, they'll end up recalling happier memories. So when it comes to this, it makes it difficult to interfere or intervene with depression, because what a depressed person remembers are depressed memories. It's called mood dependent or mood congruent memory. The last set of research on retrieval cues has to do with your bodily state. So if you're studying for a test and you drink a lot of caffeine and and you say you smoke cigarettes, I don't encourage it, but you smoke cigarettes and drink caffeine while you're studying, you should do the same thing when you take the test, because you're going to remember more. It's state dependent memory. Your body state needs to be in the same state it was in when you learned it as when you're asked to recall it. There are even been researchers that have looked at the effects of alcohol and marijuana in small amounts. And so obviously a huge amount of alcohol or weed is just going to interfere with memory. But small amounts, they've shown that if a person is in the same state when they're asked to recall the information as they were in when they put the information away, they're going to remember that information better. It's called state-dependent memory. All right, that's all I have for you. Thanks.